I would like to introduce Nancy Cross. She is the Senior Associate Athletics Director and Senior Women's Administrator for Purdue Athletics. She oversees 6 programs: men's and women's golf, women's soccer, softball, and men's and women's tennis, and also manages a portfolio of department donors. After receiving her master's degree from Purdue, Nancy has held numerous positions in the athletic department, including Associate Athletics Director for Marketing and Development, Director of the John Purdue Club, Assistant Director of the John Purdue Club, Promotions Coordinator, Head Field Hockey Coach, and Assistant Women's Basketball Coach. Nancy, you really can do it all, I think. She has been the recipient of many campus honors and awards, including Outstanding Advisor by the Purdue Foundation Student Board, Purdue Alumni Association's Special Boilermaker, and Outstanding Woman in the Sports category by Greater Lafayette. Please help me welcome Nancy Cross.
Thanks, Courtney. I'm delighted to be here. And when I see the names of some of the people who are entering, it's bringing back lots of wonderful memories. I saw Cindy Ransom. Oh my gosh, haven't seen that name in forever, and so many of my former players. So I appreciate you guys getting the network out and joining us tonight. So thank you. When Joanne Troutner asked me if I would talk about the evolving landscape of intercollegiate athletics, and especially name, image, and likeness, which is clearly a hot button, I absolutely said I'd be happy to do it. So once we settled on a date. So thanks, Joanne, for the opportunity. So the agenda tonight is, I thought it was important not just to land where we are right now, but to give a little perspective about how we even got here. And some of that's good, some of that's not so good. And then I think about telling Purdue's story is important. And then an overview of NIL, and then specifically how NIL is impacting, or NIL at Purdue, and then NIL impact on women, and then potentially the future of intercollegiate athletics, and then we'll open it up to any questions. And by that time, you guys will all either have had too many glasses of wine or be totally bored. So, all right, so this is not a science. This is not anybody's dissertation. If somebody asked me like how we got here, I thought it was important to just talk about my opinion of what has kind of the milestones in intercollegiate athletics that brought us to where we are today. So I started about 2007, and that was the Big Ten Network. And the reason I thought that was significant was because at that point, everybody started talking about all of the money, all of the money that the Big Ten Network was going to bring in, and then how was that going to be dispersed? So I think it's important to talk about. And interestingly, when the Big Ten Network started in 2007, August 30th, because there were issues about getting it started before the first football game, it was in 17 million homes. And if you fast forward to today, it's in $73 million homes. So if you can put a price tag on that, you can see that, when we all talk about money and finances or whatever, this was the first time that we talked about the resources that a network could bring to our Big Ten conference. This February 12th, 2012, multi-year scholarships. And that became huge because it was the first time there was really an outcry from the student athletes about them being exploited. At lots of schools, if you got it for 1 year, it was automatically renewed for the next, but at a lot of schools, they were 1 year agreements, and that was a way for coaches to get rid of student athletes. So there was enough of an outcry by the student athletes to say, this just isn't fair. So they started doing 4-year athletic scholarships. So you signed, you knew exactly what you got, and you knew exactly how long it was going to last. So that was critical because it was the first time it was a reaction from the student athletes. I put March 2014 in there, and I don't know if anybody remembers a gentleman by the name of Shabazz Napier. So Napier was a men's basketball player on the University of Connecticut men's basketball team, and they were advancing to the finals. They just won the semifinals, and they were advancing to the NCAA championship game, and they ended up winning that year. But he was being interviewed by a Fox News broadcaster, and his comment was, some nights I go to bed starving. And that question brought, that response, that answer to his question brought all kinds of issues forward about, with all the money the NCAA is making on the men's basketball tournament, why is it that our student athletes, go to bed starving or go to bed hungry? Now, of course, knowing what we do for our Purdue student athletes, my immediate reaction was, I wish that announcer would have asked the next question. Well, how much did that tattoo cost, and how big is the TV in your house? Because everything that we do is choices and consequences. But the fact that back then in 2014, he had about 150,000 hits from that comment. So it started to grow legs, and then all of a sudden, we're talking about the exploitation of our student athletes. Right after that, amazingly, we had in April of 2014, we had a deregulation by the NCAA of meals and snacks. And that may not mean much to you, but back in the day when we could, quote, give the kids snacks, there were such regulations about you could have bagels, but if you put peanut butter or cream cheese on it, it was classified as not a snack, but a meal. And then it was an extra benefit. So I felt so sorry for all of our compliance staff who are running around all the time trying to figure out, wait, is that a plain bagel? Oh, is that a bagel with, with cream cheese or peanut butter? It was absolutely ridiculous. So the deregulation, once again, I think was a reaction from Napier's comments, as in addition to kind of this outcry from the student athletes about, we're up at 6 going to weights, and then we're running to practice, and we're running to class, and we don't have time to eat, etc. So the whole deregulation of meals and snacks came about, and it was important that this message was, we are going to take care of the nutritional needs of our student athletes. And they didn't have to worry about it being taken away from their room and board money, from their board money. So if you gave them, 15 meals a day, they still had their, if they were in the residence halls, they still had their meal plan. If they lived off campus, they still got the full allotment of their board money. So that was a huge deal. At the same time, April 2014, we had Northwestern football players, they're trying attempt at unionization. And because of how close Northwestern was to the steelworkers, it was the steelworkers union that kind of got the group going. It was close to Chicago. It's a private school, so there was access to a lot of things that a public university wouldn't let the union people be on campuses, et cetera. And basically, the comment was that they are employees, because if you take the value of their scholarship, that's enough to be considered compensation, and they could be considered employees. Well, as we know, that thankfully never played out, but it got everybody's attention. My colleagues at Northwestern, still have post-traumatic stress syndrome from being called witnesses and having to testify in Congress, et cetera. So it was not a positive experience, but it again brought lots and lots and lots of light onto intercollegiate athletics. In August of 2014 was the O'Bannon versus the NCAA. And O'Bannon was a UCLA men's basketball player, and he felt that if UCLA was going to use his image, that there should be some compensation for him. This was really more the start of name, image, and likeness. So NCAA lost that, O'Bannon wins, and things start to escalate. In August of 2014, again, this was an important issue, is that the Autonomy 5 was created. And that was important because the 5 power conferences or autonomy conferences had more resources than most of the other Division I schools. There are 351 Division I schools, and there's been an unbelievable amount of schools that have gone from Division II to Division I in an effort to share in the spoils from the NCAA men's basketball tournament. So it helps them fund all of their programs if they can go Division I. So there are 351 of those. Well, there's a huge discrepancy between the Power 5 or the Autonomy 5 conferences and the resources that they have versus the 351st Division I school that came into Division I. So the Autonomy 5 basically said, listen, we have more resources. We want to be able to do more things for our student athletes. So the NCAA, fearful, I think, that we were going to head, all the Power 5 conferences were going to say, if this isn't done, we're going to just start our own NCAA and be out on our own. So they agreed to the creation of the Autonomy 5. Then in January 2015, again, once we had student representation in all of the conference meetings, as well as the NCAA convention, cost of attendance was passed. And that's really what we call gap money. And every institution determines what tuition fees, room, board, and books is, and then what it actually costs to go to school. And they include transportation. There might be requirements for a laptop, their laundry money, toothpaste, that kind of stuff. So that's factored in, and it's factored in outside of athletics, or technically was supposed to be factored in. For years, it was factored in outside of athletics. And that's called the actual cost of attendance. So when that got passed, it then allowed every institution, Division I, to pay what we called gap money. And it was the difference between a full ride scholarship, which many of our student athletes were receiving, versus the actual cost of attendance. So cost of attendance was passed. Again, then the burden of being able to provide all that was placed back on each institution. Then this past year, June 2021, the Alston versus the NCAA, and that was a 9-0 decision. So it's not like people were not really sure about this, but this is basically saying that you can't deprive the student athletes with opportunities for the costs associated with education because they're student athletes. So I'll give you an example. We provide tutoring and mentoring anyway for our student athletes, any student athlete who wants it, but were institutions that were not doing that, so that became a cost. Now this is saying that if a student athlete wants a study abroad program, I remember a few years ago, we had a softball player who was going to be able to do a study abroad experience, and she applied and was accepted, and then applied for the financial aid part of this study abroad program, but couldn't accept that because it would have put her over what a full ride scholarship was, and the NCAA disallowed that. So basically they're saying that we are allowed now to provide resources and funding for educational expenses. The Big Ten and many of the Power 5 institutions have not implemented this yet. It can't be that every Power 5 conference gets together. Within the Big Ten, we can make a determination of what our policy is, but it can't be like collective bargaining where where all the Power 5 institutions are at the same level. So we're in the process now of working with it's called we refer to this particular policy as the 5980, because that's the limit that the judge placed on what we could give to each student athlete in terms of cash. So it's $5,980. Again, that hasn't yet been implemented within the Big Ten. But interestingly, I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and her comments were, this is starting to really escalate, where we're paying for everybody who wants to take their GREs, apply to grad school. We've gotten a request for noise canceling headsets because the kids travel so much in order for them to be able to study. You know, it's laptops and iPads. So she said, in addition to the cash award, it's an unbelievable that everything could fall under what the category of educational expenses. And then I put June 2020 because the NCAA adopts interim NIL policy, and technically it is an interim because they're waiting for either Congress to make the rules about NIL or the NCAA will adopt, permanent rules. And then July 2021, I put that as significant because that's actually what drove the NCAA to make their interim policy. There were 8 states that on July 1st were ready to legalize name, image, and likeness, regardless of what the NCAA said. So that outside pressure put all kinds of, it really forced the NCAA's hand to pass a name, image, and likeness. So in my mind, all of these things have factored into kind of where we are and where we landed. And so much of this is driven by the student athletes and making sure that they're taken care of, but making sure they're not exploited, et cetera. So one of the things that frustrates me a little bit about intercollegiate athletics is we have those institutions that do great things, and then we have other institutions that, you know, are always in the gray area or in the not so gray area. But one of the things that we don't do well, and it goes back to the philosophy, if you always do the right thing, you don't talk about it, you just do the right thing. And so the way we treat our student athletes, and that's come from, you know, athletic director Morgan Burke, athletic director Mike Babinski, you know, their whole, and it matches Purdue's core values of, you know, they're here to get an education, they're here to do something that they absolutely love, and we're absolutely not going to exploit them. So we put this Boilermaker benefits sheet together, not only for the student athletes, but also for our recruits. And it talks about, you know, tuition and fees and what that would be for an Indiana resident, and then what it is for all the other states. And then we have obviously, Purdue has a ton of international students and a ton of international student athletes. So we have an international amount as well. So you can see that, you know, tuition and fees for an Indiana student or Indiana residents about $10,000. It's almost $29,000 for everybody else that's out of state. And then it's about $31,000 for anybody international. Then you go to room and board, and those are the same whether you're an in-state kid or an out-of-state kid or an international kid. So if you're living on campus, you get about another $10,000, and if you're on campus, it's $10,000. Off campus, it's about $10,500, and then it's up to about I can't read that number. Up to $800 value for books. And then they go back to the gap money. And again, there's a black line on my screen. I don't know if there is on yours, but it shows $2,000 gap money for an Indiana resident. And again, those numbers were determined by our financial aid office. Julie Dunn, who works directly and very closely with Intercollegiate Athletics, does a phenomenal job. She's probably the most well-respected financial aid person in the Big Ten. In the Midwest, it's about $2,100. So if you're a Midwest resident, they again have factored in travel. And then if you're international, it's $4,000 that you get as gap money. And then fueling stations. What we call fueling stations are the deregulation of snacks and meals, and the amount of money that is available to our student athletes, so that between Mucho, which is you have a card and you can run to pre-approved by our nutritionists and our dietitians, that they're allowed to go to a Jimmy John's or Noodles or Chipotle or whatever and get food, so that as they're running to practice, because they're coming late from class, that they actually are going to be fueled before we put them through a workout or put them through strength and conditioning, et cetera. So that value's close to $1,000. And we have, again, access to the nutritionists, and these kids have access to the fueling stations literally 24/7. And then food. It's literally unlimited on campus, $1,500 if you're living off campus, and it says $3,000 for everyone else. And that's including when you're traveling with your team. But the thing that I also wanted to point out, which again, our student athletes probably, you know, because we think it's the right thing to do, and we don't always talk about all the things, great things that we do for them, we felt it was important to kind of put down, identify some of the personal services that they get for being a student athlete. We do a lot with media training, the strength and conditioning, access to tickets, not just for, you know, for their parents, but for themselves when they go to football and men's basketball games. Athletic support. they get mentoring and tutoring and you know, I always tell the story. It's so amazing to me. And again, I'm glad this is a conversation with mostly women. But I can tell you that our female student athletes, the day that they get their course syllabus in August or in January, they go over to our academic learning center and ask for a tutor. They know the demands of their sport. They know the demands of their travel, and they want to make sure that they stay ahead of things. And I have seen it 2 weeks before exams, the onslaught of other student athletes who are running in at the end saying, I need help before exams start. But we want our student athletes to take advantage of all the things that we offer. We have help with all kinds of things like sports medicine and team psychologists and massage therapy and video services and chiropractors and eye care and transportation. We have a number of our doctors who are in Indianapolis, and you know, it's our responsibility to take the student athletes down and back for appointments. So all of those things that are great services to our student athletes, I don't know that our student athletes really understand all the things that we do for them or the price tag that's associated with it. But at the bottom, Marie, if you could scroll up a little bit, because at the bottom it shows what we did was we took our entire budget, divided it by the number of students that we had. Scroll up a little bit more. Sorry. Well, what I wanted to show you is that everything factored in. An Indiana resident on campus, the value of their full ride scholarship is about $40,387. Off campus, it's almost 41,000. A Midwest resident on campus is close to 60,000, or 59 if you're on campus, 60 if you're off campus. And all other states, it's 61,000, and the international, it's almost $64,000. So again, when a student athlete looks at the scholarship and they're like, well, you know, this is what I'm getting, they have not really done a good job. We've not done a good job of factoring in all of the other things and services. And this doesn't even include facilities. If you think about the state-of-the-art facilities that our student athletes get to train in and compete in, we think we've done a lot of really good things for our student athletes. And again, because it's the right thing to do, we haven't done a good enough job, not just us, but everybody in the Big Ten and a lot of the Power 5 schools, of explaining, you know, why a student athlete who says, my gosh, I go to bed starving, and they don't always realize all the things that they have for them. So I just wanted you, as people who are going to be evangelistic about Purdue athletics, to understand all the amazing things that our student athletes have at their disposal if they take advantage of it. Okay, so name, image, and likeness, and this is basically just kind of the definition. So the NCAA, the whole NIL is about whether somebody's an amateur or not an amateur, and you can't participate and be eligible in intercollegiate athletics if you're not an amateur. So the name, image, and likeness, NIL, basically is the NCAA bylaws, including prohibitions on pay for play, and improper recruiting inducements remain in effect, subject to the following. If an individual elects to engage in an NIL activity, the individual's eligibility for intercollegiate athletics will not be impacted by application of bylaw 12, which is the amateur and athletics eligibility. So basically, when this interim NIL policy came out, it was admitting that this cannot be paid for play and it can't be an incentive for recruiting. But other than that, you can participate in NIL activities as long as you're following what your institution is asking you to do, that it's not going to impact in any way your amateurism or your eligibility. So anyway, so that's basically what the NI rule is saying. You are now allowed to monetize your name, your image, and your likeness, and it's not going to have an impact on any kind of eligibility. All right. So now that you kind of have the 30,000-foot view of what NIL is, I wanted you to understand what we're doing at Purdue. So I have to do a shout out because part of the issue of where we are was because the NCAA in many ways had their head buried in the sand for a lot of years. They just kept ignoring signs and signals that things weren't going well. And we have a very proactive athletics director who has engaged our staff in understanding, whether we like it or not, NIL's coming down. You know, as soon as O'Bannon and Alston was, O'Bannon in particular, defeated the NCAA in name, image, and likeness, you know, that was the wake up call for many athletic directors who are proactive. And I give kudos to Mike for being proactive. And he worked or engaged our two areas in athletics. One was our area of compliance, and the other was our student development area. So that's our leadership and the area that helps all of our student athletes do the amazing things of getting internships and learning how to write resumes and understanding how to lead your team, but more importantly, how to lead yourself and make good choices. And so in addition to those two areas, he also got our marketing group involved. And so they came up with Purdue's philosophy on what NIL is. And so basically, we wanted it to be housed under our student athlete development area, and we call that Empower. So basically, our philosophy is that the goal of our student athlete development team is to empower our student athletes through education, entrusting them with the resources needed to succeed, and providing entrepreneurship opportunities. So at every concept, the whole idea of entrusting, educating, and opportunities for entrepreneurship were at front and center. And again, because we did things right and didn't boast about it, we have for years, our compliance staff, so Tom Mitchell, Stephanie Harpinaw, Jacqueline McGill, Teddy Fracci were doing unbelievable things at allowing our student athletes to have the same opportunities that every student on campus had. Now, it couldn't relate to athletics, but it could relate to all of the other talents that they had. So for years, Tom Mitchell and his staff have been able to get waivers to allow a student athlete to monetize some of their talents even long before NIL. But now this is going to be available to all, 600 plus of our student athletes. So we felt like we needed to have much more structure in it. So basically the philosophy and approach is we're going to empower the kids because we're not allowed to do lots of things, but we're going to give them the tools to do it. And then we're going to try to be a resource for them and make sure that we're trying to help them make great decisions. So here's general principles, basically what the kids can and can't do. So an NIL allows the student athlete to make money from commercial use of name, image, and likeness, hiring a marketing assistant or agent or whatever to represent or assist them is fine. What the NIL does not allow them to do is anything that looks like pay for play, like somebody can't be monetized for how many touchdown passes they make or catch, or how many, what their hitting percentage is in volleyball, or how fast they run at our cross country meet. So anything that's tied to, we'll give you this if you perform at this level, is off the table. And then the school, we're not allowed to facilitate any deals on a student athlete's behalf. So there are lots of things that we can do and many things that we can't. So it's important, and we've got tip sheets for the kids. And again, our compliance staff from day one have communicated all the unbelievable things that the kids can do. But they have to be part of understanding, because to us, it goes back to the educate and empower. It's giving them the tools to do it and not, leading them every step of the way. So institutional involvement, again, is providing, we have spent a lot of resources on hiring outside agencies and consultants to help our student athletes. understand what they're doing. You know, everything from group licenses to understanding how to, you know, figure out what's what you can what content that sports information puts out that you can use. So again, institutional involvement is our job is to educate, provide the tools, and provide some opportunities. So we compliance put this tremendous tip sheet together for the student athletes, and it's basically student athletes may be confident that being compensated for their NIL will not decrease their athletic scholarship in any way. So it's not like they come in and they say, okay, I've got a $1,000 deal to do XYZ. And then we say, okay, well, your scholarship was worth $19,000. Now it's going to be reduced to 18. So their NIL compensation doesn't in any way jeopardize their eligibility or their scholarship. Their Pell Grant and other need-based could be impacted depending, and so we encourage them to work with our Division of Financial Aid with any of their questions. They may promote their personal brands to maximize the value of their name, image, and likeness. They may earn compensation for use of their name, image, and likeness from opportunities such as fees per lesson and camps and clinics, and the majority of a lot of our students are doing that. Promoting products and services, podcasting and other ad-driven businesses, sales of merchandise or memorabilia owned by the student athlete, autographs and personal appearances, and even crowdfunding. Refer to their participation in intercollegiate athletics and their attendance at our institution as part of paid NIL. Retain a professional service provider to help them secure compensation for their NIL. Again, the institutions are not allowed to provide that. We can't make any deals for the kids. Student athletes, this is what the responsibility of the student athlete is. They have to disclose employment activities, including NIL activities and transactions, and they do it through an app that I'll talk about in a minute. Disclose professional service provider to the athletics compliance office. So if they have hired somebody who's a professional service provider or a marketing person or an agent, that has to be shared with our compliance staff that's assigned to their team. And then student athletes may only include institutional trademarks, logos, if they've gotten permission from our university licensing and trademark office. And then this is what the students are not allowed to do. Student athletes are not allowed to do. Receive NIL compensation in exchange for athletic performance. Receive NIL compensation that is provided or offered contingent on initial or continued enrollment at Purdue University. Engage with an athlete agent for any purpose other than securing compensation for NIL, including marketing their athletic abilities to other colleges and professional organizations. Receive compensation for their NIL from an officer, director, or employee of our institution. So it's not just the athletic staff that can't help broker these deals, anybody at our institution. Enter an endorsement contract with the following categories or brands, companies, or types of contracts. A tobacco company or brand, including any vaping device, e-cigarette, or related product, any alcohol company or brand, any seller or dispensary of controlled substance, including marijuana, any adult entertainment business, any casino or entities that sponsor or promote gambling activities. So our job is to provide NIL, helping them build their board, build their toolbox, and build their brand. So moving on to the caveats were all the things they can't do that I just read. So empower is basically it's the educate and trust and entrepreneurship that Peyton Stovall, who's our assistant athletic director, is in charge of. It's the whole leadership opportunity and empowerment of our student athletes. And through lots of research and through lots of making decisions and entering into an agreement with a number of outside entities, the group of compliance and Peyton and Empower, and then our marketing people settled on Influencer, which is an app that our student athletes have. And it helps them in so many ways. It helps them with content. It helps them verify what they're doing in terms of any NIL agreements. And it's amazing. They all have them on their phones, and as soon as the game's over, they want to know if there are any pictures, or did you get me kicking that goal, or catching that pass, or it's amazing. But the kids work very closely with their sports information contacts here in athletics, and they know exactly what they can do and what they can't do with that. The Brand R group is a recent addition, and they've been hired again to help educate our kids, but more importantly for any kind of a group license. So their job is, if we get enough student athletes who are willing to sign a group license, then the Brand R group can go out and try to broker with both the university, because we would use their marks, and with our student athletes, a group license. So then they would all benefit. And then the Altia Sports Partners, and they are basically kind of an educational group, and they help us educate our student athletes about, what Purdue's philosophy is of NIL, and what NIL is allowing you to do, and how to jumpstart your own NIL journey, and basically about branding, etc. So they've done a really great job. And then I also wanted to point out that Credit School of Management has a 3 credit hour class called Optimizing Personal Branding and Image. And again, in order to get something passed through the whole curriculum process, took lots of time. So the fact that we were ready to go July 1st tells you how proactive Mike Bobinski, our compliance staff, our leadership in our student athlete development area, and our marketing group work. And I want to particularly talk about the Credit School of Management, because this class was filled immediately, but athletics is only allowed 50%, not more than 50% of the enrollees in that class, because the last thing that we wanted after doing something that we thought was the right thing was to have the whole North Carolina impact, where they had classes strictly for student athletes. And then they did all kinds of things that would not pass muster for us in terms of what was the right thing to do academically. So in order to prevent that, not one more than 50% of the class can be student athletes. So now there's the kids are fired up about registering for next semester's class, and I know they're all trying to get into the 3-hour Credit School of Management class, and so far it's gotten incredibly high marks, and kids are really excited about learning how to optimize their own brand and their own image, and go from there. So, all right, Maria, if you could move to the next slide, please. All right, so I just thought it was interesting that I was down at, for those of you who live in the Indy area, the Fashion Mall not too long ago. And this picture is displayed, and it goes from the upper level to the lower level, right by the escalators in the food court. And years ago, if we were doing any marketing in Indianapolis, our student athletes would have given their left arm so that their number and their face would have been on the picture. We do this because we're not allowed to use the student athlete's name, image, or likeness without compensation. So the idea of this is, technically, you don't really see his entire face, you don't see his number. There are no tattoos, no images that you would be able to identify who the student athlete was. So in some ways, it makes me a little sad. And in some ways I'm thinking, okay, you know what, this is all about protecting the kids' image. So anyway, but I thought I would share that with all of you, thinking, I was going up the escalator, I see this, a huge banner, and I'm thinking, this is exactly what NIL is all about. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Maria. All right, so specifically, since this is cocktails and conversations with mostly women, I wanted to share some data on some of the NIL impact on our female student athletes at Purdue. So currently we have 20 females actively involved in NIL deals, which is about 10% of our female student athletes. And ironically, that's a little bit higher. Our total number of male student athletes in participating in NIL activities is 9%. So the percentage is higher, but the actual raw number is lower. We have 30 total NIL deals that have been disclosed by our student athletes, and know that if they are engaged in any NIL deal, they have to disclose it. 30 of them, and 83% of that is social media. And then the average NIL deal is about $109, and the median NIL deal is about 48. So it's just starting. But I wanted to show you that that those who are aggressive are finding ways, and those who still aren't sure are going on. Then compliance shared some additional data with me today, and out of the unique student athletes with transactions, we have 2 women's basketball players, 2 women's golfers, 1 women's swimming, 4 women's track, 5 softball, 2 soccer, and 4 women's volleyball. So those are the number of student athletes, not necessarily the number of NIL deals. So just wanted to share that. So if we could move on to the next one, the next slide. So before I kind of talked on NIL's impact on women nationally, I wanted to share that a lot of the transaction deals for our Purdue student athletes are mostly social media. As I said, this category encompasses a wide range of NIL activities, includes but not limited to podcasts, brand ambassador endorsements like clothing, restaurants, farm equipment, and then personalized videos. And then camps. We have a lot of student athletes who are conducting their own camps with the assistance of friends and family. So registrations, advertising, et cetera. And then additionally, some are simply using their NIL in conjunction with working a camp that's owned by another individual, a former student athlete oftentimes. And then lessons, student athletes are conducting lessons in person or via Zoom. We all learned how to do that after COVID. And then business ownership creation. We have a few student athletes are crafting NIL merchandise that features their NIL. And then public appearances. We have had 8 student athletes partnered with 1 corporate entity to make public appearances. So NIL nationally, and so some of the highest paid and most notable student athletes in this new era are female. So Olivia Dune is the LSU gymnast, and she's one of the highest combined social media followings of all student athletes. And she's partnership with apparel companies and Plant Life and whatever. And she's being very careful, but they have her predicted to be over at some point over 1 million. And then Hannah and Haley Cavender are Fresno State women's basketball, and they basically rose to notoriety on TikTok. Their partnerships with Boost Mobile, PSD Underwear, and have their own branded clothing line, and have been featured on HBO. And then UConn women's basketball, which is interesting because they've kind of gone this almost as a group license, but their players have filed trademarks for nicknames, for hosted camps, clinics, created apparel lines, and the proceeds are all going to a charity. So I think that's quite a statement too. And then Lexi Sun she's a volleyball player from Nebraska. Her has partnered with volleyball apparel company REN and jewelry brands. And then female student athletes have excelled in NIL, not regionally and locally, and they have unique opportunities on the horizon. For example, the SEC women's basketball players are working with local restaurants that align with their personal brand. So, for instance, if a group of them are vegan, then they as a conference want to do some kind of group licensing with restaurants that again, match their core values and what their brand is. Potential licensees are interested in equestrian student athletes for group licensing opportunities. I think it was Brenda or actually Altius was sharing with us that it may have been Levi or Wrangler. I guess it was Levi. It said they were interested in going after student athletes who are on an equestrian team, because again, that meets their needs. So that was interesting. Santa Clara women's soccer team has all partnered, the entire team, group licensing with Chili Sleep, which is it's a system that cools your mattress or whatever while you sleep. And the whole team is into it because they are using it for research. So they've gotten an NIL association so that throughout the whole season, because rest is so critical to a student athlete's performance and their recovery, et cetera, that this Chili Sleep wanted data. And so it ended up that the whole team did it. Plus they have one spokesperson who, Santa Clara won the Division I women's soccer championship last year. And their best player was drafted 18 to Chicago and opted to come back for another year because of COVID. She was given another year. So she ended up coming back. And so in addition to the group license, she's a spokesperson for Chili Sleep. And then another one I thought was quite unique was MaximBet offers a statewide deal to every NCAA Division I, II, and III female student athlete in Colorado if they're over the age of 21. So they were adamant about making opportunities available to every student athlete in Colorado, or every female student athlete. And then 200 of the Florida Atlantic University female student athletes have partnered with the NHL Florida Panthers. And so they're in an NIL agreement or opportunity, but it's for things like coming to the games and wearing the t-shirts and posting on social media that you're there, because the Florida Panthers said we want them to understand that hockey's for everybody, and what a great way if we have all these female student athletes there. So that was one of the reasons that the Panthers opted to do an NIL deal with the Florida Atlantic students. And then the female student athletes really are their own worst enemy. There was an article written by Christy Josh, who I thought did a really great job talking about our women think, well, I don't have enough followers. I'm not good enough. I'm not attractive enough. And they stop pursuing opportunities. And so the idea is we can't be our own worst enemy if we want this to be successful for our student athletes. So we need to do a much better job of encouraging without providing opportunities. So that's one of the things that I think I personally need to work on with our student athletes. On to the second to last slide, please. Sorry, you guys, I think it's getting close. All right, so future of intercollegiate athletics. Clearly, the NCAA Constitutional Convention, November 15th, we have absolutely, that was a preemptive strike in my mind by the NCAA president to do something that, so instead of the Power 5 schools moving out and saying, we can't do this anymore, he's gonna try to revamp the NCAA Constitution. So we'll see where that leads. Title IX, we have to make sure that every opportunity that we're now providing through NIL is not going to impact anything with our female student athletes. And I give kudos to Purdue Athletics again, starting with our athletic director Mike and moving all the way down the line, to every person that interacts with our student athletes. The men's and women's teams are getting the exact same education, the exact same tools, the exact same opportunities for entrepreneurship. This is not a Title IX issue. The NLRB September statement is basically saying that we're going to continue to fight to prove that these student athletes are indeed employees. Student athlete mental health is absolutely high on everybody's radar, and is going to certainly continue to be in the front of everybody's mind. student athlete physical health, concussion issues. Not only the research that's being done, but what they find is, years down the line, what's happened after somebody's had a number of concussions. So those are issues that we certainly don't want to exploit our student athletes. The transfer portal. Before you had to have a conversation with your coach and you had to at least wait a year and you couldn't transfer within your conference. Now, all of that's out the window. And, with the additional year due to COVID, the transfer portal is the most widely used thing in the NCAA. The collegiate model, to me, is the most amazing thing in the whole world. We're the only country in the world that has an opportunity for a student athlete to play a sport that he or she loves and get their education. And I want us to hold on to that collegiate model as long as we possibly can. And I also think broad-based programming. As I said, when we first came on, I have a number of former field hockey players who I'm just so touched that they're on this call. But broad-based programming was so critical to what we were trying to do. Everybody deserves that chance. And I can tell you that when I went into their homes and offered them $300 to come to Purdue, I felt like Santa Claus, and I know that they valued that $300. And I know in the modern era, $300 would have been not even gas money to get here. And then I worry about entitled student athletes. So much of what we've done over the last 2 decades has been about meeting the needs of the student athletes. And I totally agree that the pendulum had swung so far to the point of, we're making so much money. There's millions of dollars made, $1.1 billion for the men's NCAA tournament. There's close to $500 million for the championship football playoffs. And so when student athletes see that, and they're the ones that are generating that kind of revenue, it's only fair that those resources get siphoned back to the kids. So, all right, last meeting. I guess we're opening up to questions.
Thanks so much for that, Nancy. I know I learned a ton, and the intercollegiate athletics landscape has obviously certainly changed since many of you on the call were former student athletes as well as myself. We've got some really great feedback for you, Nancy. The Nancy Cross fan club has some comments. Including you're a wealth of information. Thank you for sharing. That's from Joanne Troutner. Sammy Chergo says, Nancy, you have been such a mentor, advocate, and friend to so many, including me. Thank you. Faye says, very informative. And Linda Carroll says, just happy we have Purdue marketing in Indy. Love it. Thank you. Is it okay if we have time for a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So Kelly Lehman has asked a really, Kelly Lehman has asked a really great question that I've actually been thinking about myself. So I'm happy that she asked it and someone else was thinking about this as well. What type of impact do you think the NIL will have within team locker rooms? The camaraderie with each other, since not everyone will have the same financial power with the NIL.
Well, that's a great question. And Kelly, who was an assistant basketball coach at North Dakota State, she played on our basketball team here, probably didn't have as much of that issue because everybody in Division I that gets a scholarship it gets a full ride scholarship. But I can tell you in other locker rooms, there are kids who are on full rides and there are kids who are walk-ons, and there's issues in the locker room. As long as the kids understand that they have the tools, they've been educated, and how much of what they want to get out of this is how much they put into it. So it would be different if we went into the locker room and said, again, it can't be tied back to to performance, but saying, Courtney, we're gonna give you an opportunity to be educated about NIL and meet the people from LTS and the Brandar group and group license. But Nancy, we're not going to give you that opportunity. So I think kids can learn from each other. I'm hoping that, that once we get 4 years into this, the upperclassmen will do a great job of helping the underclassmen wait a minute, you know, you go to Chipotle 100 times a week, you know, why don't you see if they'll let you get free meals if you can, you know, wear their t-shirt or whatever it is. So I'm hoping that, you know, that there aren't going to be issues in the locker room, but.
Free meals at Chipotle sounds like a great deal to me. We have another question from Libby, and she was curious as to who are the 8 states that legalized NIL?
Well, a lot had it on the books, but effective July 1st, it was Arizona, Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky. How many did I get? Okay, Georgia. So it's Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Nebraska. So those were the 8. But others were saying it would be effective January 1st. So we had a lot in the pipeline. But the fact that 8 of them were going to go, you know, Ohio, I think, was close. They were in a position where it was happening. And so the NCAA, you know, really was just, it was a tidal wave. They had to do something. So.
Sure. And just to clarify, there's a question in here from Faye. She just wanted to clarify the NIL at Purdue started this academic year, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Marino.
It went into effect because the NCAA allowed it to go into effect July 1st.
Great, thank you for clarifying. We have this, if this is okay to be the last question, just since we're right at 8 o'clock. We have a question from Marino Walsh. Does NIL prohibit use of players' image combined with Purdue's image? So such as the player wearing a Purdue shirt?
That's a great question. And her daughter is a phenomenal star on our women's soccer team who actually finished second, and they're going to the tournament, and we know they're going to the NCAA. So if it's a normal part, and I think Stephanie Harpinaugh is on the call too, if it's part of the normal, like I go to school here and I'm on this team, that's one thing, but they can't be using that to endorse other things without getting permission. So she's got her uniform on, that's a normal part of who she is, etc. So that part is I think allowable. Okay. And Maria, we'll get back to you if it's not. So we don't get Grace in trouble.
Well, thank you so much, Nance, for taking the time to speak with us this evening, and thank you all to our outstanding attendees for participating.